My name is Hurley Haywood. I've been racing cars for a long time, mostly with Porsche, but when I broke my leg, Jaguar came to my rescue and I drove for Bob Tullius and Jaguar for a number of years. So here we are today, and unfortunately, Bob passed away, and that was really a sad moment in my life.
Yeah. Uh, if you know.
That's definitely the reason I reached out to you earlier. I'm sorry for the way Bob's loss is also affected you. I guess that was something I was curious about, right? So this is kind of Audi focused, so I'm kind of reaching out to you today, much in the vein of the common grounds. While you'll find racing fans and car enthusiasts amongst my audience as well. So I'm sure there are plenty of people who know your name and his well outside of the Audi lexicon. But for the Audi listeners, you all were very involved in the 200 Trans Am program in 1988. And so that's part of my focus today too. You mentioned breaking your leg and Jaguar. Is that your first interaction with Bob?
Well, I had known Bob from the racing scene for many years, but it was the first time I really had a chance to interact with him. And when I broke my leg, I simply could not push the clutch down on a Porsche. So it took 2 years to get the leg healed up where I could push the clutch down. And Jaguar came in and said, you don't have to use the clutch in our cars. We have a Hewland gearbox, and you can just time it perfectly and not use the clutch until you have to come into the pits or leave the pits. So that was really worked out. I went to Porsche. I said, listen, I can't drive the car. I can't push the clutch down. Is it okay if I go over and drive with Jaguar? And they said, yes, we don't want you sitting around doing nothing. And so keep that program going, and then come back when your leg heals up.
So just to clarify, you were a factory Porsche driver at the time, contracted with them, and yes. Their take was you definitely want to keep yourself honed. So we're fine with you racing with the competition.
Yes,
if you will.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And that the first introduction we had was a really good one. And I had, when Joe Hoppen called me and they said, we've heard from Al Holbert that, Bob Tullius has talked to Al to ask what he thought of you as a driver. And Al was, very complimentary and said, if you can hire him, will do a really good job for you. And I had sort of had this sort of image of Bob that was not particularly good. He was a real hard ass and difficult to work with. And so, I didn't want to be sitting around doing nothing. So I said, okay, I'll go. And so the first race we were together was at Watkins Glen, 6-hour race. And from that first meeting with him until, recently, he and I got along perfectly together. And, I was in Vietnam, so I kind of knew what the military protocol was. And Bob was, a military guy, and he ran his ship like a military. And I got along with that fine. And he and I, there was only one time that I can remember that we had an argument, and the rest of the time was perfect. I mean, it was really great, and he and I were good friends. And he, we went from the Jaguar to the Audi program. Joe Hoppen called me up, and they said, that Tullius was going to lose the Jaguar deal to Walkinshaw. And what do you think we should do with the Audi program? And I said, well, that's kind of a non-issue. You should get Bob Tullius to run it. He's got the whole mechanism in place. He's got the mechanics, he's got the trucks, he's got the whole thing. And Joe Hoppen agreed with that, and he said, "Okay, we'll see what happens." And we went. I remember we.
Do you mind me asking a little bit of background, just because some people may not be familiar with these names? Joe Hoppen at the time was head of Audi Sport in the United States. I believe he was also, at least during the Can-Am, I don't know when it ended. You could probably tell me better. He was also head of Porsche Motorsport in the United States. So I'd imagine you worked with him. It sounds like you worked with him when you were earlier racing for Porsche.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So we, when that thing sort of came together, we went over to Ingolstadt in Germany to sign the contracts, and Bob sort of was a little hesitant not to do the program, but to with the sort of the discipline that Audi was putting in place. So Bob was going to be the front guy, but Audi was going to supply all the technical people, mechanics, everything. So Bob was a little bit at the beginning uncomfortable with that, but he got used to it, and it kind of all worked out. I remember the first time we went to a racetrack with the Audi. There was a couple press guys there at Road Atlanta, and they were going, "What the heck is going on here? This is a sedan. You can't race this thing in Trans Am. This would be uncompetitive." And I said, "Yeah, just watch this." And that Audi 200 was like magic, and it was fun to drive. You could drive in any kind of circumstances, and so it all kind of worked out.
So I guess that would be one of the things I'd be curious to know Bob's response, or the team's general response to, he'd been running Jaguar, their factory program here in the United States, and with Audi coming in, replacing a lot of personnel, placing with a pretty unconventional race car compared to what they've been racing before. I'd imagine that was quite a leap for all of you to sort of make that change. And it sounds like by Road Atlanta, you were well convinced of the car and what it could do. But was there a point in the situation where you were skeptical, or did you just trust him, what Joe was pitching when he came to y'all?
Well, let me just backtrack a little bit with Joe. Joe called me up on the phone one day when I was, still healthy and my leg was working all right. And he said, "I want you to come to Atlanta, and there's a 12-hour race for basically showroom stock cars." And I said, "Really?" I said, what do you got in mind?" And he said, "Well, there's an Audi 200 sedan, and we want you to race that." And I mean, it had street tires on it. It was like, just drove off the showroom floor. And
so basically outwardly a stock 200 sedan.
No, they hadn't stopped. I mean, they hadn't stopped the production of the 200.
Right.
That's the reason that they did it, was just to sort of showcase the capabilities of all-wheel drive. So that initial introduction to the Audi, and we won. But by the way, we won our race, and it was raining, and so that was the perfect combination. And so then we went forward, and when Bob Tullius lost the Jaguar deal, the Audi program was a perfect fit for him. And I was familiar with the car, and we had the 200. It was, everybody kind of laughed at it, and they said, this is a joke. And the first race was like, I mean, kill the competition. And they were, every race, the SCCA was trying to put penalties on us at weight, smaller rims. I mean, just all kinds of stuff, air restrictors, and nothing seemed to slow us down. I mean, it was just like, okay, bring it on, we'll deal with it. And it really didn't make any difference. Audi was so good. It was just, it was the unfair advantage to the highest degree. And when, basically at the end of the season, SCCA basically kicked us out. They said no more all-wheel drive. So then we switched over to the 90, and in IMSA, and that was like an unbelievable car also. And it was, much more powerful, had much bigger tires, much more tricky to drive, but really fun to drive. And we just could, go anywhere we wanted to on a racetrack, regardless of
Yeah.
if it was raining, if it was sandy, it was, oil on the track. It was just made no difference. Lap times were always the same, practically.
Was Group 44 and Tullius involved in the 90 program?
Yes.
Okay.
So we had the Audi program for 2 years. The
Okay, so
first
they
with the
ran.
200 and then with the 90.
Okay. I don't know why I was thinking maybe I just didn't see the Group 44 branding on the car on the 90, or maybe I just missed it. I don't know. But good to know. I was going to ask you more about the 200 program, but if it's both seasons, there's a lot more to cover there, right? I'll tell you, last time we spoke, something I've been curious about, and I wanted to clarify. One of the things you mentioned, you guys did the full season in the 200, but missed a couple of races at the beginning of the season with the 90. Is that correct?
With the 90, we missed Daytona and Sebring. The reason we did that was because the cars were not developed for long distance races. They were developed for short races. And we still, clobbered the competition during that reduced schedule with two major races being taken out of the program.
So basically, Daytona and Sebring beginning of the season, probably the car probably wouldn't have lasted the race. So tactically, didn't make sense to enter it in those
correct.
races. Well, if I can jump back to the 200, I guess maybe we should start with that. I've always been curious about that one with you, so I wanted to clarify. But then with the 200, I'm looking at the schedule. Did you all race the first round in Long Beach?
Yes.
And it looks like you didn't win that one, but then there's Audi almost across the board the rest of the season. You won the second round in Dallas. Any standouts, whether it's that race or others, that really?
Dallas was a joke. I mean, the racetrack was a sand pit. I mean, it was out in the desert. I mean, it was just, brick walls right on the racetrack. I mean, it was very difficult. And we were just kind of scratching our heads going, what is going on here? How can we race in a circuit like this? And once we got on the track, and we could run anywhere we wanted to. I remember I was having a little dice with Willie T. Ribbs, and I just was following him to see where those cars were weak. And finally, I got tired. I said, "Okay, I'm going by him." And I passed him on the outside in the sand, and looked over and kind of waved at him as it went by. And I mean, that was like the case for almost all the races. It was just you could just run those cars anyway. They had great power, and they were just really great to drive. And what made it nice was basically Hans Stuck and myself were teammates, and then Walter Rule would come in on the races where we were going to run three cars. Okay. And very quickly into the season in the Trans Am, Audi realized that the driving style between Hans and myself were very different. And so we both were assigned our own engineer and our own mechanics. And that was a really great relationship, and that followed through to the 90 program. So it was, the cars were set up differently, but that was okay with Audi. They said, you guys have to drive it. You set it up the way you want to do it, and it kind of all worked out. So that was something that was really pretty nice of them to be able to do that.
Back in the day, I'd seen publicity photos of Michelle Mouton sitting, as if she's getting in the car, and I don't know that she ever raced it. There's no record of her. Do you have any recollection of Audi sending factory drivers, whether it was Michelle or anybody else, or was it only ever going to be Walter and Hans?
Yeah, those were the only two from Audi Europe that came over.
Yeah. Well, one of the other things I was curious about, because I'm sure there's probably some a story behind it. Is I look at the wins, if you will, right here on Wikipedia, and I see a lot of Walter and oh, I'm sorry, I said you you won Dallas and you won Detroit, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious if you had strategy for you had some very pretty heated competition from your German teammates, and clearly they're in the same machine you are that can do these things. Did you have a particular strategy for winning? You of course won the championship that year. Did you have a strategy for winning out over them?
Oh, well, I got Hans at the beginning had a little bit of a difficult time adjusting to the Audi, the way it would handle and with all-wheel drive. And I took, to it right away. And, winning at Detroit, that was a big deal for us. And, right in the heart of the pony cars and, the Mustangs and the Camaros. So that really, one, frustrated him greatly, and two, um, sort of marked the start of the dominance of the Audi program in the racing field, both on the Trans Am side and on the IMSA side. And Hans quickly, God, I remember him coming up to me and says, God, he said, they're going to fire me. I just can't get used to these cars. I said, it'll come. Don't worry about it. And then, he was like, once he sort of got the hang of it, he was a challenge to beat.
But well, I guess let's fill on Detroit for a bit. That's in Motor City, right? It's in their hometown. You've got the import car. I know you look back in the Pikes Peak era, and I remember reading about how Audi was kind of received a little bit differently from the establishment in Pikes Peak, where it was more domestic competition at the time. And clearly this is too. Can you tell me more about that weekend and what it was like?
The weekend in Detroit, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, if my memory is correct, we were switching back and forth between first and maybe fourth, third or fourth, and we had a restart. There was an accident or something, and we had a restart with maybe 3 laps to go, and I was sitting in third. Pruitt was second, and I forget who was first. And I had 3 laps to sort of figure out where I was going to make the move to pass those guys. And sure enough, they both crashed into each other, bumped into each other, and I went sailing by them. And I remember my crew chief and my engineer almost leaped out onto the racetrack. They were so excited to see me coming in first on that last corner, going up onto the pits straight. So yeah, that was really a cool deal. So it was really a nice sort of Audi family to be part of. And, there was a lot of competition between Hans and myself. And, Hans, I think, won every single race in the IMSA side of it. And, he was just a really difficult guy to get by and win. But it was a nice feeling.
You mentioned the 200 and the 90 being quite different to drive. Would you be able to expand upon that?
Well, the Audi 200 had a long wheelbase to it, so it was like a sedan, where and had fairly good power, but not the kind of power that the 90 had. And the 90 was a shorter wheelbase car, and was just, because it was all-wheel drive, the viscous coupling, you couldn't adjust it on the go, but you could adjust it in the pits. And the cars were just unbeatable, and they had so much power. They had over 700 horsepower. And when you have 700 horsepower and you have four wheels that are taking that power and applying it to the road, it just makes a combination where the other guys, they might have had the same horsepower, maybe even a little bit more, but the drive was basically on the rear wheels, and the performance of the cars went downhill when they would start to get hot, and if they didn't manage that properly, they were lost. And so we could just run almost 100% and not have any problems with handling.
And did you find it tricky throughout the season? I think both seasons you guys got hit with ballast, right? Like with penalties on that, and not penalties, performance balancing, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But did you find it a challenge to kind of, did it change the dynamic of the car over time as those changes were made? In which case, how'd you deal with it?
There was no degrade in performance on all of the things that they put against us. We just overcame them. We might have maybe make a little adjustment here and there, but it was not a big deal, and that was by choice, not to complain and not say, "Oh, that 100 pounds you put on us made no difference at all."
So the team was, in that time, based in Virginia. Is that correct?
Yes, Virginia, Winchester, Virginia.
Were you there much of the time? I guess if you could take us back in time, what was that like in that era?
Well, the shop was, as you can imagine, like an operating room, and Bob was there, basically all the time, and Lanky Fouché was the head of the crew, and it was, we did, as drivers, we were not encouraged to go. Every once in a while, we would go just to say hello to the team, or somebody's birthday or something. We would show up, but basically we were to keep our nose out of the running of the cars, and then we would debrief, or we would have a meeting before the race weekend.
Okay.
And we would discuss what we had done, and you know um, and just go from there.
And I'm not sure when it probably happened. How soon after the last round, I don't know. But when they disqualified the car, the 200, from competing again in Trans Am, was there any concern about how they would pivot next to, they're back a year later, less than a year later, with a new car? Was that anticipated, that they already knew it would be outlawed and would just move on to the next series? That car was already in development.
Well, I think switching over to the 90 was in the plan all along.
Was it?
The 200 was sort of a start, and sort of we analyzed what we needed, what was going to make the car fast. We were on basically the same tracks that we would be racing on, and so it was kind of like a warm up. And then the Audi, when we went over to IMSA, was a much more serious car. I mean, the budget was huge. The talent was great. And so, but from the driver's standpoint, both Hans and myself had gotten used to the four-wheel drive systems. And when we coupled that knowledge with the car that was, basically a race car versus a sedan, it was like magic.
When you guys raced with Walter, I know one of the challenges in the rally program when Quattro first came out was learning to drive it. Mikola famously kind of taught his teammates, Mouton, et cetera, how to deal with the left braking and having it throw its weight around. You mentioned that you took to the car a little more quickly than Stuck did. Do you think that I guess what I'm asking, it's a long lead up, I suppose, but did Walter bring any insight when he came over? Of course, he came from rally. It's rare that he was doing road racing, especially back then.
Walter was a great teammate, and he understood the whole dynamics around having, three drivers on a team. And he was always helpful. If he was always open to trying to help us deal with whatever problem we might have. But he never was there sort of, you need to do it this way, and this is how I do it, and this will work for you. It was kind of, you figure it out. If you have a question, I'll be more than happy to answer it. And so it worked out really, really well. Hans and Walter were close friends. They're both German. And so they, had a lot of conversations in German.
Sure.
But, Walter was a fanatic about fitness. We slightly had a different approach to that.
Yeah.
He was a great teammate and certainly an unbelievable driver that could sort of get every ounce of performance out of the car without looking like he was out of control. I remember we were in Sears Point, and it was raining, and nobody was going out, and everybody was encouraging Walter to go out and show us how it's done. He had the entire pit crew or the entire paddock at the fence watching him drive. I mean, it was like unbelievable what he was doing with that car.
Was this a test or was this at the race?
No, it was at a race. It was, but it was raining like crazy, and
yeah,
he decided to go out and show everybody how it's done.
Did you find it was I don't know, with the rain, clearly you guys had an advantage in those situations. You mentioned your testing or running the 200 earlier at Road Atlanta with those test cars. Did you prefer it when it rained?
You just kind of dealt with it when it came. I mean, the car was so much better than anybody else in the rain. I remember at Mid-Ohio, we were sitting on the grid when I fired up the motor and turned the windshield wipers on. It made one rotation, and then the blade flew off the car, landed in the pits. And of course, there was not enough time to put the wiper back on the windshield.
Oh no.
So basically, I drove the entire race, or however long it was raining, without any windshield wiper. And I kind of, would peek out the window to see where I was going. And I remember, Deborah Gregg, Peter's second wife, going really, really, really slowly. And I just didn't see her and ran right into the back of her and didn't do any damage to my car, but knocked her off the racetrack. She radioed into Bob Snodgrass, who was, the president of Brumos, and she said, "I want you to fire him. He just ran me off the road." Bob said, "Just slow down. Get back on the racetrack and continue on." And so, it didn't really make any difference. You just sort of found a way to do it. One of the things I'm often asked, what is one of the greatest traits a racing driver has, and that's to adapt to whatever change there is. If you don't adapt to the change, you're going to,
right,
not win.
Well, so Porsche in and of itself was quite a progressive change when it arrived on the scene, but by the time you're moving out of Porsche temporarily with the broken leg to Jaguar, you're I'd imagine that the Audis were kind of alien and quite different than either the Porsche or the Jaguar at the time. So if you picked it up quickly, your adaptability must have been fantastic at the time. Which track did you say you lost your windshield wiper at?
Mid-Ohio.
And were you working? What I'm curious about with that one, with of course being Brumos, you worked for them famously for years. Were you working for Brumos at that time as well in the off season?
Yes, I was the executive vice president.
That's that must have created some very interesting water cooler talk once you get back to work.
Yeah, but Deborah got over it,
Yeah.
and she has become a great friend. She's out in Colorado, and she's got a flower farm out there, and so she was doing a great job, and she was not born a racing driver, but she loved the racing stuff because of Peter, and it was nice. So she got over it. She knew she
Was
was
she
away.
was she in a 911 that day?
No, she was in a Camaro or a Cougar. She was in a
Okay.
Cougar.
Perhaps not knocked out of the race, just knocked off the track.
Yeah, she was not out of the race, just off the track.
Yeah. Well, how did you, if I don't, I mean, that sounds very challenging, if not impossible, to run. Did you lose your driver's side windshield wiper? And I mean, I'd imagine between spray and everything else.
There was one on the 90. There was one windshield wiper. It was a
Okay.
big long one, and so there was no, you know,
Just nothing.
no windshield, no wiper on the windshield. But when you went fast enough, the water kind of blew off, and you could see.
So the faster you go, you're fine.
Yeah,
Ish.
yeah.
Funny. So you win the championship in '88, and immediately you're going to IMSA. Did you think they were up to, I mean, IMSA is going to be higher stakes, more competition when you get over there, presumably. Did you have a pretty open outlook to how you and the team would fare in the next season?
Well, I had started my career with IMSA, so I loved racing in IMSA, and it was no really big transition from a sanctioning body's standpoint. And IMSA would always kind of listen to what I was saying, and would treat me as a valuable tool to sort of regulate regulations and make them fair for everybody. But the general consensus in the paddock was that it was going to be very hard to slow the 90 down. And they had learned from SCCA that, putting weight on or doing whatever they were going to do was just not going to mass superiority of the systems of all-wheel drive.
At that point, did you kind of figure you probably couldn't keep the program legal, if you will, for a second season?
No, it was all legal. I mean, it was within the rule book. But
sorry, I don't mean, it's probably a poor word choice on my part. I mean, by 1990, they had ruled out that car, disqualified that car from competition presumably because of its performance, just like the Trans Am, correct?
Well, they didn't ban the car; they banned the technology. So they banned the four-wheel drive system, because whether that was on an Audi or whether that was on a Ford Mustang or a Camaro or whatever, that system was not allowed. So that doomed the Audi and
Was anybody else in that period trying all-wheel drive?
Not that I can remember. I think that we were the only ones that had the all-wheel drive system.
I was just curious. I know that later, not long after this program, Audi ends up they went to DTM after that, and then touring car started to come up in Europe, and Audi the quattros within a couple seasons got disqualified, if you will, there as well. But in that case, you had, what was interesting about that, Ford was experimenting with all-wheel drive in the Mondeo and just simply wasn't able to make it competitive. So they never actually ran it in racing, but they tested it. And so I was just curious if unfortunately a disqualification of all-wheel drive pretty much ends the Audi program. So maybe didn't disqualify the car, but effectively that's what it did.
Yep, correct. Did
you kind of figure that was? You mentioned you're interacting with him, and the rule makers. Did you kind of see the writing on the wall in regards to that the program probably didn't have a second year in it for that reason?
Well, I think we all realized that. I mean, it was not something, we might as well make hay while we can, and win as many races as we can. And if they banned us. They banned us. We'll go
Right.
do something else.
Did you ever have any awareness in period? I know the cars got shipped to South Africa and were used there, and eventually I think the tech from even the GTO ended up in a NS4 that was raced down there. Did you ever have any awareness of that series of that racing?
I was aware of it, but I didn't,
Didn't.
participate in it.
All right, so I guess the Audi program was over. How did that affect in this end of 1989? How did that affect you or your relationship with Group 44?
Well, it still remains strong. So Bob, even though we weren't racing anymore, Bob was still a really great friend. And he moved from Winchester. He moved down to a sort of a fly-in place close to Daytona, and we would see each other on a pretty regular basis. He would come up to St. Augustine, and we would have lunch together, and talk about the old times. And that really lasted. I think the last time I physically saw Bob was at an RRDC dinner in Daytona, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And he was, he was still had his wit and still had his mind, but you could tell the body was failing.
Yeah.
And it was sad to see that, and Chip Robinson and I have remained friends, and Chip was a pretty integral part of Bob's life, and it's just he led a good life. He was 95 years old, and pretty active until the end. And so it was sad, when somebody that well passes away. It's just kind of hard to accept.
Sure. Yeah, I totally understand that. Well, I would like to thank you for taking the time to kind of revisit that. I don't know. Anyway, if there's anything else you'd like to add regarding this, I'm happy to include it.
Bob really transcends the simply the racing part. He was the guy that really set the bar for excellence. And there were few people in that generation. There was Al Hobart, there was, Peter Gregg, Roger Penske, and Bob Tullius. Those three guys really set the platform to motivate other teams to do what was needed to make them excellent. From the way the transporters looked, the way the crews looked, the ways the cars looked. So if you flash back to when I started racing, we would be at Daytona for the 24-hour race,
Right.
and 75% of the cars would be broken after the 12-hour mark. Nowadays, that same formula that Bob had is now used by every team, and they have 90% of the cars that start finish. And so that, I think, is one of the reasons why Bob was so good for racing, is he was the one that sort of set the bar, or one of the people that set the bar of trying to be excellent all the time, not just one race or two races, but for the whole season.
So I did a piece on Bob yesterday for the site, and one of the things that came up in my research on that was the presentation, right? The whether it was working with PR people, the large semi that he started to use early on and kind of set him out in the visually with a certain state of intention in the paddock. So clearly it sounds like his presentation game was he was about setting that example higher, and it sounds like that was then across the board too. I didn't check his reliability of the cars finishing. Was that something that was a clear advantage of Group 44?
Well,
Was the consistency of finish?
Let me just sort of clear that thought up.
Okay.
So he was a real really finicky about the way things looked and the way things operated. So that kind of style and the beauty, there wasn't a scratch or a piece of dirt on the trailers, on the transporters, on the race cars. Every time they would come in off a practice run, the cars would be polished. They would be spotless every time they went out to the racetrack. So if you have that sort of mindset that says, okay, the cars are going to look perfect, the transporters are going to look perfect, the crew is going to look perfect. If you can't back that up with being competitive, then it's kind of useless. So Bob not only had great looking cars, great looking crews, but he also backed that up with cars that were really quick and reliable. So it all kind of went hand in hand. And if you take a look at, the people that sort of adopted that style,
Right.
none of them were wankers. They all were competitive and ran up at the top. They might not have won all the races, but they were very competitive.
Do you think that's attributable to his military background? Just a certain level of
Yes,
just mindset across all bases?
Yeah, I definitely think that. I mean, I definitely credit the military with kind of the philosophy that I had in dealing with going into a really bad place, Vietnam, and facing the reality that you could get shot or blown up at any time when you were over there. And I think that the attention to detail that Bob had was based on his military experience. And, I was just, I was an airfield commander's aide. We were stationed in Can Tho, which was south of Saigon, at a helicopter base. So, you know, I, I was not on the front lines, but you were still in a, active military zone. And I think that the details that you went about your life on a day-to-day basis in a war zone was something that was very valuable to me when I came back to the United States and started racing with Peter full time in 1971. I was in Vietnam the end of 79, all of 70, and then came back in 71. So I think that helped, and that gave me a little bit of an advantage over the competition. And I think that from Bob's standpoint, he worked the same way, and he saw that right away. He knew I was in the
Hmm.
military, and he's that worked with him very well.
I look back and I see I was pulling some photos from the time period, and I have some black and whites that I got from Audi years ago. I don't know if you can see this, but as I had read that. Can you see this photo?
Yep, sure can.
I assume that's the infamous transporter that I had read about, or one of them. But I was noticing too just the detail work of I assumed it was Audi because I've been with Audi and Le Mans for years, and their level of polish. I half wonder how much they learned and then during this program. But like, of course, this is black and white, but you can just see the detail work of all the uniforms and the like. All the everybody matching. In that period. So what you're saying, that clearly wasn't normal in that period, where just there was that level of detail in all things.
Well, when yes, those uniforms were white, and so a white uniform on a racing team is like crazy. And
Sure.
when a mechanic or somebody got grease on the uniform, they were immediately told to change back into a clean uniform. So and that was all the times. There was a wardrobe in the trucks that had nothing but brand new white uniforms, and um, that was just sort of the way that he operated. And when you have, when you look good, you operate good. So
I mean, that's such a military mindset, right?
Yeah.
My dad was in the Navy too, and I've not served, but I just remember him kind of being very similar, and I'd imagine that was very conducive to this sort of operation.
Yeah.
Well,
So-
sir, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it, and it's just such a pleasure to always catch up with you.
Okay, good enough. Enjoy it.
Take care, Hurley.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
The Four Rings, If You Know You Know podcast is part of the Weekly Driver podcast series. For more news and features about Audi, visit the Four Rings, If You Know website at oooiykyk.com. That's 4OSIYKYK.com. There you can also subscribe to the Four Rings If You Know Substack newsletter that will keep the latest Audi news and features coming straight to your inbox. Four Rings If You Know is an independent production and not affiliated with the Audi brand. If you know, you know.